An intern could do this job. That was what Evan Cross, my new manager, said out loud in front of my entire team. 15 years. 15 years of 5 a.m. logins, cancelled vacations, sleeping next to my laptop during system outages, and holding together a compliance platform that had survived 3 restructures and 2 near-federal audits. And this man, slick haircut, buzzwords for personality, decided I was replaceable by someone whose biggest responsibility yesterday was choosing a lunch spot. The room went silent. Paige, seated nearest the window, froze mid-sip, her acrylic nails tapping nervously against her mug. Dylan from finance blinked twice, like he was processing a car crash in slow motion. No one laughed. No one defended me. Not because they agreed, but because they knew better. I didn't argue. I nodded once. Calmly. Too calmly. I stood, slid my badge across the table, and pushed my chair back. The screech it made against the tile felt louder than Evan's voice, like even the furniture wanted to protest. I walked out without raising my voice, without tears, without drama. Just that strange, eerie calm, the kind that shows up right before something irreversible happens. Evan didn't even look surprised. He looked victorious. Like firing me was his first real win. As I reached the hallway, I heard him say, "All right, let's get Lena, our intern, ramped up on Sarah's workflows. Should be straightforward." Straightforward. Lena had shadowed me for 2 days and still couldn't tell which terminal handled compliance verification. Not her fault. The system was never meant to be intuitive. It was designed to survive failure, vendor collapse, regulatory changes, panic from leadership. And I'd built most of it myself when everything else had fallen apart 5 years earlier. By the time I hit the parking lot, my phone buzzed nonstop. Team chat. Dylan, what the hell just happened? Paige, are we in trouble? Lena, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that. I turned the phone off. I sat in my car, an aging sedan that rattled at red lights, and stared at the steering wheel. No anger yet. Just stillness. The kind where your mind already knows the ending, but your body hasn't caught up. They thought they fired an employee. They didn't realize they'd just removed the only signature keeping the entire operation legal. And somewhere deep inside the system they didn't understand, a countdown had already started. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly, letting traffic lights change without caring if I caught them green or red. My phone stayed face down on the passenger seat, vibrating every few minutes like it had a pulse of its own. I already knew what the messages would say: confusion, panic, whispered questions no one dared ask in the meeting room. They still hadn't realized what they'd done. 5 years earlier, when Apex Dynamics nearly collapsed, I was the last person standing in the operations wing. A vendor had gone bankrupt overnight, taking half our documentation with them. Federal compliance rules changed mid-quarter. The CTO locked himself in his office, and senior leadership argued about who was responsible. I was the one who stayed. Back then, Marcus Hale wasn't around. He'd been finishing business school, learning how to talk confidently about systems he'd never touched. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding ours line by line, writing emergency patches at 3 a.m, and creating workaround protocols just to keep auditors from shutting us down. Those fixes were never documented. Not because I was hiding them, but because there was never time. Every patch was triage. Every solution was temporary, stacked on top of the last. The system became a living thing, held together by logic, instinct, and memory. My memory. By the time leadership realized stability had returned, they were too relieved to ask how it had happened. I became the quiet constant. The person everyone assumed would always be there. That assumption ended that morning. When I finally parked outside my apartment, my phone buzzed again. I flipped it over. Nora had called. 5 missed calls. Then a text from Emma. He asked me to generate the compliance snapshot. I don't know which environment to access. He keeps saying it should be intuitive. I almost laughed. There was nothing intuitive about a system that had survived 4 audits on borrowed time. The compliance snapshot Marcus wanted required a manual reconciliation across 3 hidden modules, 2 of which only triggered if the request came from my credentials. Credentials I no longer had. I typed one message back to Emma before putting my phone down again. I'm sorry. I don't have access anymore. It was true. And it wasn't. I didn't log in. I didn't help. I didn't warn anyone. Because this wasn't sabotage. This was absence. An absence, in a system built around one person, was going to expose everything Marcus never bothered to understand. By morning, leadership would start asking questions. By afternoon, the system would start failing quietly. And by the end of the week, they'd finally realize that what they'd called replaceable had actually been the only thing holding the structure upright. By Wednesday morning, my name was already being spoken in hushed tones. I knew because Caleb called from his personal number, something he'd never done before. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, he said carefully, like the word itself might shatter. Things are weird. Weird was generous. Overnight, the automated reports had stopped syncing with the federal compliance server. Nothing had exploded, yet, but silent failures were always the most dangerous. Systems like ours didn't scream when they broke. They whispered, and by the time anyone noticed, it was usually too late. Marcus noticed the whispers. He called an emergency meeting that morning, pulling in operations, finance, and IT. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. Marcus standing at the front, sleeves rolled up for authority, throwing around phrases like temporary anomaly and minor data lag. According to Caleb, Emma sat pale and silent, her laptop open but untouched. She'd spent the entire night trying to follow my old notes, fragments of comments in code, half-finished diagrams, acronyms that meant nothing without context. Did you know the snapshot requires manual approval? Marcus asked her, voice tight. She shook her head. No one else did either. Because I'd never needed to explain it before. I was the approval. By noon, finance flagged a discrepancy, numbers that didn't match across regulatory reports. Nothing illegal yet. Just inconsistent. The kind of inconsistency that made auditors lean forward instead of back in their chairs. Then came the email. A formal notice from the Oversight Board requesting clarification on a compliance variance. Polite? Precise? Dangerous? Marcus forwarded it to the entire leadership chain with one line, investigating. Should be resolved quickly. That's when the panic set in. Nora messaged me privately. They are asking about the failover logic. He says there must be documentation somewhere. There wasn't. The failover logic lived in my head, built during a 12-hour outage years ago when the vendor's system collapsed and we had minutes to act. I'd written the fix on instinct, tested it once, and prayed it would hold. It had, because I was always there to watch it. Now, no one was watching. By late afternoon, the system began timing out under routine load. Small delays. Subtle lags. The kind that told an experienced operator exactly what was coming next. Marcus, however, saw only resistance. "Why is this so complicated?" he snapped in another meeting. "This should be straightforward." Straightforward systems didn't survive chaos. The cracks were spreading now, and everyone could feel it. They just didn't know yet that the foundation wasn't cracking. It was already gone. By Thursday morning, weird had officially become urgent. The oversight board didn't like silence, and they liked inconsistencies even less. A second email arrived before 9 a.m., this one firmer, requesting a live walkthrough of the compliance system by end of day. No extensions. No excuses. Just a calendar invite with too many people CC'd. Marcus called another emergency meeting. This time, he wasn't smiling. Caleb told me later that Marcus paced the room, rubbing his temples, repeating the same sentence over and over, "We just need to explain it clearly." As if clarity could be conjured without understanding. As if confidence could replace competence. Emma finally spoke. I think Rachel used to handle the reconciliation manually," she said quietly. "There are approvals that don't trigger unless her credentials are involved." The room froze. "Her credentials?" Marcus asked. "That doesn't make any sense." It made perfect sense. The system had been designed to trust one human checkpoint, someone who understood when to slow things down and when to let them pass. Automation only worked because judgment sat at the center of it. Judgment Marcus had fired. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. I answered on the third attempt. "Rachel," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Too careful. We need your help." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I said nothing. "There's been some confusion," he continued, "about how certain processes were managed. We just need you to explain a few things." Explain. Not apologize. Not acknowledge. Explain. "I don't work there anymore," I said calmly. There was a pause. A long one. "Of course," Marcus said quickly. "But this is just transitional. We are all on the same team." "No, we weren't." "You terminated my access," I replied. "I can't log in. I can't verify anything. And legally, I shouldn't." That word, legally, changed everything. His voice tightened. "We are facing a potential compliance issue." I almost smiled. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it, in the way you're sorry when a bridge collapses after the warning signs were ignored. "But I can't help." We hung up. Within the hour, leadership was scrambling to hire an external consultant. Someone expensive. Someone unfamiliar. Someone who would ask all the wrong questions first. The walkthrough with the oversight board was pushed back, barely. A temporary delay granted, along with a warning. One more variance. One more unexplained failure. And the contracts would be reviewed. Marcus had wanted control. Instead, he'd inherited a crisis he couldn't talk his way out of. And the clock was still ticking. By Friday morning, Apex Dynamics had done what panicked companies always do, they threw money at the problem. A well-known compliance consultancy was brought in overnight. 2 senior analysts and a lead architect arrived with polished slides, confident smiles, and the kind of certainty that only comes from not knowing what you're about to uncover. Marcus introduced them like saviors, promising leadership a fresh, objective review. Fresh was the problem. The consultant started where everyone starts, with documentation. They requested system maps, approval chains, escalation protocols. What they received were fragments, old diagrams, outdated process notes, half-finished flowcharts that ended in question marks. By noon, their confidence had dulled. The lead architect asked a question that echoed through the room: who designed the human override logic? Silence. Marcus cleared his throat. It evolved organically. That was corporate speak for we don't actually know. The consultants dug deeper. They traced the approval paths and discovered hard-coded dependencies that pointed to a single user profile, mine. Not as a bottleneck, but as a safeguard. A final check before reports became legally binding. That's not best practice, one of them said slowly. No, the architect replied, eyes fixed on the screen. But it explains how this system stayed compliant for so long without automation failures. They asked if I was available for a call. Marcus hesitated. Then admitted the truth: I'd been terminated. The room shifted. The consultants exchanged looks that didn't require words. One of them finally said it: then you don't have a system problem. You have a governance problem. By mid-afternoon, the oversight board sent another notice. The temporary delay would expire in 72 hours. If the compliance walkthrough failed, all active contracts would enter review status. That meant penalties, suspensions, headlines. Finance ran projections. Worst-case scenarios landed hard. Caleb texted me a single line: they are panicking. I believed him. Marcus tried again. This time, his message was longer, more careful. He mentioned mutual benefit and short-term consulting options. He didn't mention his earlier comment. He didn't mention the intern. He didn't mention the meeting room. I didn't respond. Because this still wasn't revenge. It was consequence. The consultants delivered their preliminary findings that evening. The verdict was brutal and simple: rebuilding the system without its original operator would take months. Maybe longer. And doing it under regulatory pressure was risky at best. Marcus sat at the head of the table, silent now. He'd fired experience. And bought himself a deadline that didn't care about his title. By Monday, the story inside Apex Dynamics had completely changed. Meetings were no longer about optimization or growth. They were about survival. Legal joined every call. Finance stopped talking about forecasts and started talking about exposure. The word liability replaced innovation almost overnight. And my name kept coming up. Not with arrogance anymore. With caution. The consultants returned with a clearer picture, and it wasn't good. The system could technically be rebuilt, but doing so without triggering compliance violations would require freezing multiple operations. That meant breaching existing contracts, including the largest government agreement the company had. One consultant put it bluntly: you're compliant because nothing has changed. The moment you touch this without understanding it, you risk everything. Marcus listened, jaw tight. That afternoon, I received an email, not from Marcus, but from Elaine Porter, the company's legal director. The tone was formal, careful, and very intentional. She requested a conversation. Not help. Not a favor. A conversation. I agreed. We spoke that evening. Elaine didn't waste time. She acknowledged the termination. She acknowledged the public comment. She acknowledged, in careful legal language, that the company had underestimated the risk of my departure. Then she asked the real question. What would it take for you to consult? I took my time answering. I explained the reality. Any involvement would need to be clean. Written. Limited. I would not log in as an employee. I would not assume responsibility for decisions made without me. And I would not be rushed into shortcuts that could compromise compliance. Elaine listened. Took notes. And compensation, she asked. I named a number that reflected 15 years of unpaid risk, after-hours emergencies, and institutional knowledge no document could replace. High enough to hurt. Low enough to be reasonable. There was a pause. I'll take this to the board, she said. The next day, Marcus didn't attend the leadership meeting. Instead, Elaine did. She presented a short-term consulting proposal, my proposal. Time-bound. Clearly scoped. With one additional condition, operational authority during the engagement. No interference. The board approved it. Unanimously. By noon, my contract was signed. By afternoon, my credentials were restored, temporary, controlled, and monitored. I logged in for the first time since being fired. The system responded like it always had. Stable. Quiet. Waiting. Marcus sent one final message that day. Glad to have you back, he wrote. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't back. I was just finally being treated like what I'd always been, the leverage. I didn't announce my return. No company-wide email. No awkward welcome meeting. Just a calendar block labeled compliance review, and a system that finally had its operator back. Within hours, the inconsistencies vanished. Reports aligned. The compliance snapshot generated cleanly, the way it always had when judgment guided automation instead of ego. The oversight board joined the walkthrough that afternoon. I led it calmly. Methodically. I explained the failover logic, the manual checkpoints, and the reasons behind decisions that had once looked inefficient on paper. They asked sharp questions. I answered all of them. Not defensively. Just accurately. When the call ended, the board chair nodded once. Thank you, she said. This system is unconventional, but effective. We expect no further issues. The contracts were cleared. Just like that, the crisis ended. Inside Apex Dynamics, however, things didn't go back to normal. They couldn't. Marcus's authority never fully recovered. Decisions that once passed unquestioned were now double-checked. His meetings were shorter. His voice quieter. The board didn't remove him, but they didn't trust him either. Trust, once lost, rarely makes a comeback. My consulting period lasted 6 weeks. I documented everything, properly this time. Not because they deserved it, but because systems shouldn't rely on martyrdom. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded out of necessity. On my final day, Elaine thanked me. Sincerely. Marcus avoided eye contact. I handed in my access without ceremony. And I walked away on my own terms. A month later, Apex Dynamics announced a strategic leadership realignment. Marcus accepted a role elsewhere. The press release was polite. Vague. Final. I wasn't mentioned. I didn't need to be. Because the lesson had already landed where it mattered. Power doesn't come from titles. Or volume. Or inherited authority. It comes from being the person the system collapses without. And the next time someone looks at a quiet professional and thinks replaceable, they'll remember this. At least, the smart ones will.